Thanks for staying with us here on Business Live. Now to our first story. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is urging government of Ghana and other governments around the world to increase taxes on oil and gas companies. His call is coming on the back of record profits made by these companies as crude oil prices surge on the world market. Speaking from his base in New York, USA, Mr. Guterres maintained that it will be appropriate to share the profits with countries that host oil and gas companies.
It is immoral for oil and gas companies to be making record profits from this energy crisis on the back of the poorest people and communities and at a massive cost to the climate. The combined profits of the largest energy companies in the first quarter of this year are close to $100 billion. I urge all governments to tax these excessive profits and use the funds to support the most vulnerable people through these difficult times. And I urge people everywhere to send a clear message to the fossil fuel industry and their financiers that this grotesque greed is punishing the poorest and most vulnerable people while destroying our only common home, the planet. Every country is part of this energy crisis, and all countries are paying attention to what others are doing. There is no place for hypocrisy. Developing countries don't lack reasons to invest in renewables. Many of them are living with the severe impact of the climate crisis, including storms, wildfires, floods, and droughts. What they lack are concrete, workable options. And meanwhile, developing countries are urging them to invest in renewables without providing enough social, technical, or financial support. And some of those same developed countries are introducing universal subsidies at gas stations, while others are reopening coal plants. It is difficult to justify such steps, even on a temporary basis.
Let's get on Zoom and speak to energy economist Theo Echampong. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Are you surprised by this call, or it's in the right direction?
Good afternoon or good evening, and pleasure to be here. I think I've seen a number of these calls being made over the last couple of months from various quarters, but they do rather seem populist in my view and not really driven by the underlying realities. And I'll explain that for a moment. So what are these windfall taxes? It's basically a company benefiting from a one-off activity that otherwise they had not anticipated. So because of the war in Ukraine, oil prices went up, commodities prices went up, and subsequently the companies are earning excessive or supernormal profits. However, many of these companies also have signed contracts with the respective countries and where the oil is being extracted from, which have often rigid provisions around the stabilization provisions. So what this means is that it's actually going to be extraordinarily very difficult to want to change the tax structure and or use the legal means to in an attempt to collect a little bit more money from them because prices have gone up. So the reality is that although we want to, and people are advocating for such windfall taxes, it is actually far more complicated to implement them than would actually be the case. And even in the UK, where the Treasury imposed 25p, they call it energy surcharge levy for these companies, in the same breath, they were actually giving them a number of giveaways in order to be able to sustain investment. So I think the call, I see where it's coming from, but it can actually be populist and far more away from what the reality, and it's very complicated in terms of being able to actually implement such a tax.
But tell me, these companies are already paying taxes, like the corporate tax. So if the profits increase, automatically what they pay to the state will go up. Is that not the case?
Absolutely. So what happens is that typically, let me use the oil and gas sector as an example, the upstream sector. The companies would pay some royalties, and then there would be other profit-related taxes. So, for example, your corporate income tax that you mentioned, there's also some additional windfall taxes. In Ghana, we have the additional oil entitlement, which is based on the profitability of a field and profitability of a company. So automatically within the contractual provisions, there are mechanisms to be able to enjoy from the upside if prices go up, and likewise, if prices go down, those mechanisms within the contract system should self-adjust. But it doesn't happen in some instances because of the deductions and the depreciation schedules that the companies would be subject to. So if the tax system is actually well designed and it's working well, you don't need any windfall tax at all because that will take care of itself. And inherently, what this is telling us is that in some jurisdictions, there are challenges with the design of the tax system. And so a knee-jerk reaction where you just want to impose a windfall tax because you think prices have gone up would not fundamentally resolve the issue. And then there's the additional complication of the legality or otherwise of such a move.
Come back to your first response. So if the host country is making this much money, wouldn't it benefit the country rather?
If the host country should be making and benefiting because the prices have gone up, then of course we would expect the revenues also to go up. So let's use Ghana as an example,
Okay.
where in the 2022 budget, we were putting in an oil price assumption of about $62 or so a barrel. Currently, today, we're talking about $93 a barrel. The revenue projection by the government then was that we'll be making about $1 billion of revenues from 3 fields. As we speak currently for half year, we had made almost about $780 or so million dollars. And most likely by the end of this year, if prices still stay high, we would actually have been making.
We seem to be losing Mr. Champong there. Hello, sir. Can you hear me?
In 1.5